Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. Please join me in the set-aside prayer. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. We've been looking at the first step for a long time. The first half of the first step is about addiction. It's important. It is a problem. It's not the central problem. Last week, we warmed up on the central problem, unmanageability. A synonym for that, unmanageability, is the spiritual malady. And I hope you can, at least intellectually, connect those two as synonyms. Unmanageability is the spiritual malady in the big book. When Bill says in step 10, we're placed in a position of neutrality, he is referring to the promised impact of the first 9 steps, freedom from your addiction. And he very quickly says, but we're not cured. He's not referring to our alcoholic body or our addicted predisposition, biological or psychological genetics in our body. He's not referring to our defective mind and emotions. He's not referring to the first half of the first step. At least by my understanding, he's referring to the way we deal ineffectively with reality. He introduces the concept on page 45 when he's introducing us to step 2 by at least his intended structure. He says, lack of power is our dilemma. Our will is disordered. Our will is defective. It's the first time he's ever been that clear about that part of our human functionality. He was very clear with the doctor's opinion and his comments about that in terms of the allergy of the body, that it's a biological problem. In fact, he expanded Dr. Silkworth's allusion to a problem of the mind when he gave us his words about obsession and delusion and the 2 stories of Jim and Fred. Brilliant articulation of the problem of the body and the problem of the mind. But now he's very specific on page 45. He makes that transition as we talked about last week. Our human resources as marshaled by the will. He's never been so clear. Lack of power is my dilemma. Lack of willpower. I cannot fix my willpower with my willpower. So I need power other than my power. Something to supplement my willpower so that it will operate properly. In that step 10 discussion, it's such a dense discussion. It keeps revealing itself over and over and over again. He said it's the proper use of the will. What does he mean by that? What's the proper use of the will? to be in alignment with our understanding of the will of God. Now, those are terms he uses, which we need to try to understand. What does he mean by the will of God? Well, my interpretation is reality. Reality as it is. Life as it manifests on a daily basis. I use the word alignment. It's not in the big book. It's not in the 12 and 12. But it's the most fitting word, at least from my understanding of words and my experience with it, with regard to the third step. Made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care. The proper use of the will is with my free will to align it with God's will. In fact, at the end of the 11-step instructions on page 88, he gives us a very short prayer that summarizes that. Thy will be done. With my free will, I am choosing to align my free will with my understanding of your will. Thy will be done. It's my choice in steps 2 and 3. That step 2 is about a choice. The use of my will to choose God or no God. Step 3 is about choice. It's about decision. It says it right in the step. It's about a relationship with that power. A choice about a concept and a choice about a relationship. Steps 2 and 3 respectively. The most formidable power that makes us specifically human is our free will. No other reality, no other sentient being has the ability to self-determine. And yet, that's the very worm in the wood, the crack in the being, a defective will. Bill suggests, he doesn't say it as clearly as I'm about to say it, my will on its own power will choose me. He says it on page 62. That's what we are going to look at tonight as the silver bullet of unmanageability, the exact nature of unmanageability, the spiritual malady, selfishness-self-centeredness. Bill gave us a wonderful description of the behavior that comes from that on page 52. I asked you to read it and highlight it, and then to reread it, replacing the we with I, and the past tense with the present tense, and then to read it out loud. Maybe more than once, actually. I have to ask myself why I shouldn't apply to my human problems this same readiness to change my point of view. I am 10 years sober, having had 2 previous spiritual awakenings, one at 4 years and one at 7 years of recovery. I'm still making progress at that time. I'm still making progress at this time. Unmanageability is something that is forever with us. I'm always going to be human. Therefore, I'm always going to be predisposed to, with my free will, to choose me. My will always choose me. That's the way we're structured. It's not a moral issue. It's not a knowledge issue. It's not a negative issue. There's no judgment or blame here. It's an observation. Oh, that's why he said we're not cured, because this is the way we're built. but it doesn't heal. It's not cured. It's not fixed. Bill says we have a daily reprieve. Based on the use of the kit of spiritual tools, steps 10, 11, and 12. Those tools that keep us in alignment with, in relationship with, in connection with, in an effective relationship with power. So I asked you to go then to chapter 5 and go to page 60 in the very last paragraph. Excuse me. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Are you convinced? Maybe not at this point. You've done the work of reading and highlighting. You've done the work of converting to personal pronoun and present tense. Maybe you've done the work of the will worksheet, which when you look at it, of course, it's just the bedevilments put in full sentences. A couple additional comments. The bedevilments are the litmus test of the vitality of your spiritual life. It tells you, it gives you the temperature. It is the thermostat. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Hear that. That's not subtle. Even though our motives are good, we live on self-propulsion, he said. We're the director rather than the actor. Whose job is it to run the whole show, to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, the rest of the players? It's not the actor's job. The actor's job is to know their part and take their part and know their lines and stay out of the way of everybody else. That's not how we live our life. We're actors trying to be the director. We have a script in our head about how I should be, how they should be, how life should be. And the shoulds rule our lives like puppets on puppet strings. I love that image. Once I did the fourth step, I realized that the puppet strings were cut. I was no longer subject to people, circumstances, events as much. It took a while, over the next 12 years, for the reaction to become a pause so that it was a response. But it began that very first journey, looking at my thoughts and my feelings and my behavior and taking responsibility for my reactions 100%. I don't have a part in my resentment. I do not have a part in my resentment. I have the whole thing 100%. People and institutions and circumstances and events cannot make me angry or fearful or shame or guilt. They just are what they are. My perception of and my reaction to is what brings up my resentment and my fear and my shame and my guilt. I am 100% responsible. Now, you can hear those words and you can understand the logic of it. You might even accept the psychology of it. But once you do a fourth step, you will have an experience in Technicolor of what it means. If only people would do as he wished, as I wished, this show would be great. Everybody, including myself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful in trying to make these arrangements. I am sometimes quite virtuous. kind and considerate and patient and generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. Gandhi himself. And yet, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to be mean and egotistical and selfish and dishonest. Here's the manipulation. We all have varied traits, he says on page 61. The show doesn't come off very well. He's staying with the drama, the theater analogy. I begin to think that life doesn't treat me right. I am a victim of my boss, of my father, of my mother, of my wife, of my circumstances. I decide to exert myself more. I can get up earlier. I can run harder. I can stay up later. I can go to more classes. I can hire better teachers and better therapists. I become on the next occasion more demanding or more gracious. Hear the manipulation again. Still, the play doesn't suit me. Admitting I am somewhat at fault, a little bit, I am sure that everybody else is more to blame. I was the perennial victim until 1988. 4 years sober. Angry, indignant, self-pitying. A self-seeker, even when trying to be kind. A victim of the delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well. Rest, W-R-E-S-T. We don't see that word very often, but you can see it in the word wrestle, and I like to image arm wrestle. Most of us arm wrestle reality, trying to make it fit my expectations. It never works, creates suffering on my part and suffering on everybody else's part, because reality just is. And we take it personal. Reality just is. It's not right or wrong. Reality just is. The sun comes up in the east and the sun sets in the west, no matter what I want or think about. And people just behave the way they behave because, fill in the blank, so many reasons, but it's just what is. Mothers should, fathers should, husbands should, wives should, children should, bosses should. We have scripts. Everybody, without exception, has a script, has a story about life, about themselves, and about other people. Some people are more conscious of it. Some people are less conscious. But to the extent that we operate in the realm of shoulds, we're operating in the realm of Disney, fantasy. And we really do believe, by our behavior in fairy godmothers and white knights and princesses and princesses, princes and princesses. And it's all a lie. Is it not evident to the rest of the players that these are the things I want? And do not my actions make each of them retaliate? Passive-aggressive behavior, as we call it today. Am I not, in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Then he gives us some examples of self-centered, egocentric behavior. 1939 language, it's still valid today. And every one of them is about somebody who is a victim. The business person who's retired and complaining but not taking any action. The minister who is sighing over his pathetic flock, but not living the life and shining the light of his own behavior so that they can follow him. The safecracker, the people in jail who think that they're in there for the wrong reason, etc. These two paragraphs now, page 62, are the key to unmanageability. Selfishness dash self-centeredness exclamation point. He uses the term root. This is the root of our trouble. If I had a tree here that was an orange tree, you didn't know that it was an orange tree because there's no label on it. But you look at it and you see little round balls on it. And I asked you what kind of a tree it is, you would see that it's an orange tree because of the oranges, of the fruit on it. But what you do see is the fruit and the leaves and the branches and the trunk. You don't see the root where the life comes from. That's the same with selfishness and self-centeredness. And when we get to the fourth step, you'll see I have a design there that shows the fruit of the root of selfishness and self-centeredness are the constituent parts of step 4, resentment and fear and dishonesty. Instincts gone awry. Bill calls it in step 4 in the 12 and 12. Fight, flight, and freeze. And as Bill names them in step 4 in the big book, he calls them resentment and fear and dishonesty. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Driven by, see, this is our motive, coming from the Latin movere, to move. What moves us? What drives us? Underneath, the underneath, the underneath, the underneath, when we get down to causes and conditions, the exact nature. Bill says the root cause is selfishness and self-centeredness. And that's the premise and assumption of step 4 in the big book. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. We don't know why they talk bad about us. We don't know why they retaliate. We don't know why they're passive aggressive toward us or don't talk to us and snub us. But we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. We take ownership of our thoughts and our feelings and our behavior. So he concludes in this final paragraph here. So our troubles are basically of our own making. It sounds very negative, and yet it's a big promise of hope. If my troubles are of Janice's making, I'm screwed. Because Janice has to change in order for me to be okay. But if my troubles are of my making, then all I have to do is figure out how to change so that I don't create trouble in my life. There's hope in this message. These troubles arise out of ourselves, and the addict is an extreme example of self-will run riot. I make the distinction here. All people are self-will run riot. All human beings have free will. All human beings misuse free will. The mature ones go through some form of rite of passage to adulthood, emotional and human adulthood, and therefore reduce their own suffering and other people's suffering around them. Addicts don't. We don't learn from our mistakes. We just try harder. We don't know that we don't know, and we can't see that we don't see. Boggling. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without God's aid. That's pretty clear. We're as powerless over our selfishness and getting rid of it as we are over our addiction, having no power at all. That's why it's under step 1. It's not connected to our addiction. There's a dash, not an and. But it's under step 1. Because even though we get clear of our addiction through grace and perhaps some of the work that we did in steps 1 through 9, that's the promise. By the time we get through step 9, that we're placed in a position of neutrality. We can't get rid of this, nor be cured of this unmanageability, he said. Well, he's actually going to drive it further down the hole into darkness. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore. Moral, the sense of values and a sense of ethics, right behavior. Philosophy, a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight into human development. But neither of those helped us become a better human being or have a life of happiness that we know is available, at least by seeing it in other people. But we could not live up to them, these moral and philosophical convictions, even though we would have liked to. Again, powerless. And then he puts a wooden stake into the coffin, into the heart. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. Not only can we not get rid of it, we can't even reduce it. We can't even diminish it. We can't even change it a little bit. By wishing or trying on our own power, the steps will not reduce your self-centeredness. Religion will not reduce your self-centeredness. Therapy will not reduce your self-centeredness. Prayer and meditation will not reduce your self-centeredness. Human development and all your efforts and knowledge and fill in the blank will not reduce your self-centeredness. So in the same way he ended the first half of the first step on page 43, concerning addiction, we have no effective mental defense against the first drink. We need God's help. Here, we can't reduce it much on our own power. We had to have God's help. The same kind of structure, the same kind of conclusion, the same kind of application and implication. On my own power, I will fail. My free will is not free. In addiction, clearly we've experienced that in the first half of the first step. But our free will is not free in the second half of the first step, unmanageability. I cannot, with my free will, modify my free will because it's not free to do that. It doesn't have the power to do that. It's a hell of a spot. And if you've read the assignment 5, which is now for next time to finish up with assignment 5, looking at the questions in the will structure, that will worksheet. And then the final assignment, going back to page 60 and turning that first sentence in that last paragraph into a question. It's a statement, that last paragraph, that first sentence. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And I've asked you to ask yourself, after you've done all this reading and all this reflection and all this writing, to have a meditation. Are you convinced that your life, on the basis of your self-will, will not be successful? Write a sentence about it, write a paragraph about it, write a page about it. There's no rules, no minimum, no maximum. It's a reflection. It's a meditation. After you've done all of this preparation. Because that's the launching pad for step 2. Having an experience that I'm an addict and I need God, but more especially, I'm a human and I need a power other than my human power in order to be truly human. That's the launching pad. That's the springboard into step 2. So in assignment 5, that would be items number 7 and 8, as I just articulated them. I also indicate in item 6 to read and highlight step 1 from the 12 and 12. If you haven't done that, I put some suggestion about the 12 and 12. I don't have strong suggestions about it because there are very few instructions in the 12 and 12. But since Bill wrote it, published it in 1951, he was 12 years more sober than when he wrote the big book. He wrote the big book in 1939. He wrote the 12 and 12 in 1951. So he had 12 years of additional experience, and it's a wonderful commentary on that experience. But it's the final thing to complete, if you plan on doing it. And then we'll talk some more about that next week. Today we're going to talk to some people about their experience with unmanageability. Stay focused on unmanageability. It's better if you don't connect it to your addiction, because it really is irrelevant. Your addiction at this point is irrelevant. Whether you're in relapse right now or not. If you're in relapse, of course, your life is unmanageable because of your addiction. But they're not necessarily connected. And you'll see from or hear from the people who are, in fact, in their abstinence for a period of time, whatever that is, a day or a year or a decade, it doesn't matter. Everyone on the call's life, if they're being honest with themselves, is as unmanageable as their addiction. Now, it's less today. I don't relate very well to the bedevilments. I relate to self-centeredness, but not in the grossest of senses I experienced it 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We make improvements, but I still have moments of meanness or unkindness or inconsideration or insensitivity. Unhealthy reactions to life. Fortunately, because I have a vital, consistent meditation practice and a practice of accountability, I stay pretty even. I navigate the waters of life fairly easily. So let's talk to some people today.
Yeah, I've got a question. I can remember you saying once that our suffering is proportional to our self-centeredness.
All right.
And I really liked it. This is why I remember it. And it seems to me now, and I'm not sure about it, but it seems like the obsession, the mental obsession is related to unmanageability. So
all right, tell me about, I think you're onto something here. Tell me about your connection.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's proportional of if when my life is more manageable, I usually don't get obsessed with certain things. And the more unmanageable it gets, the more I need some kind of relief.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very connected. And I believe that's why Bill says we're not cured of our unmanageability. And in step 10, in the 12 and 12, he said, when you're disturbed, there's something wrong with you. And you use the 10th step to bring yourself back into alignment to take away the tension. Otherwise, we know how we take away and smooth out our tension, right? With our addiction. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Okay, okay.
That is really the whole point of it. The spiritual
Yeah.
malady, if it's minimized, we don't have the tension or disturbance in our life. And therefore, the obsession doesn't come back as the mechanism to smooth out the waters.
Okay, okay, okay. So yeah, another question. So when you talk about self-centeredness, I can't remove my self-centeredness by doing the steps, by doing meditation, and so on and so on. And I can really relate to it because, you know, I wake up and I have all those good intentions of being a nice and kind person, and I find myself being the opposite every 2 minutes of my life.
Mm.
So I feel very powerless over my character defects and over my self-centeredness. So is it just, you know, is it just being patient and waiting until my higher power, you know, decides better?
Well, in a way, yes, but the 10th step is not about being patient, is it? It says when they crop up, we take these 4 actions. We pray, we talk to somebody, we make amends, and we turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. So it's suggesting that you can be patient and tolerant with yourself, recognizing in compassion your humanity. At the same time, you don't have to continue to be disturbed. You can take these actions to smooth out the disturbance. Because you see the truth of it, you've created the disturbance.
Okay. But you think that still doesn't mean that I am removing my self-centeredness?
The first recommendation in the 10th step of the 4 is prayer.
Okay.
You're connecting to power, but you're also human, and therefore you got to take responsibility and be accountable. So you talk to somebody, which is the second piece. That's the beauty of step 6 and 7. Step 6 says, I've got character defects. You rightly connected them in your conversation a minute ago. They come from these spiritual maladies, your character defects. But again, step 7 is a prayer, because I'm powerless over the character defect, but I'm 100% responsible for the behavior that comes out of them. So if I'm acting inconsiderate, I can make a decision, if I'm conscious, to behave myself. I still might have the inclination to be inconsiderate, but I manage it with my conscious effort in collaboration with power or God to be able to act better than I want or act better than I feel. And that's why most spiritual practitioners call it a practice. We practice step 10. We practice step 11. We practice step 12. Yeah. And we get better at it as we practice it. Like if you go to the gym, you get a coach. And over a 3-month period, you get better at doing what you do, and you need less coaching. And you are less sore because you've practiced, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So God, in collaboration with God, our character defects, which cause unmanageability, get less and less. So, and there's, you know, more and more freedom. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You're making wonderful connections. More and more freedom. And the goal of the steps 1 through 9 is freedom from addiction. And the goal of 10, 11, and 12 is freedom from unmanageability. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
I'm in codependency. That's my issue today.
All right.
The last time we talked was September 9th to him, and then I told him I didn't want to talk anymore because I had to figure out for myself the whole relationship. So what happened is, it's been really hard, but I've been practicing what you said, and I go to God, I go to my spiritual director, I go to my therapist, and I practice these to undo this codependency. But boy, I am not cured because I want, I told him I don't want to talk to him. I don't have anything to say, but you know what? I want to call him. But what I realize is the time I want to call him is when I'm working on myself and doing these homework and stuff, and I don't want to do the work anymore. I want a diversion.
You bet.
But I have a relationship with God, and he has helped me. I haven't called. I don't intend to call. But I can't do it without God. There's no way. There's no way. I've tried. I've tried my whole life doing stuff without God.
Yeah. 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 We don't know it and we don't feel it. But if we do it with the intention, down the road, when we look back over our shoulder, we see that the results are way bigger than our ability to make it happen.
If we can just hold on and wait.
Well, and that's really, yes, that I tell people all the time, breathe and lean gently into it. Yes. Yeah. It's the key to success, that willingness to just patiently show up and do the next indicated thing. It sounds so simple.
No, it's not.
And it doesn't sound very effective, but it is incredibly effective, and it is so simple. Yeah. Not easy.
No, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy.
But I have to tell you that really what helped me is I was on your another workshop that you had, emotional sobriety, and I said to you, Herb, I have this God. It's great, but I want a bigger God. And you replied, you said, well, write a set-aside prayer. What do I believe about God? And I was like, that was interesting because, I'm a Catholic. I've been going to church. I love Mass, whatever. What do I believe about God? So I was surprised because I'm not a writer. I did write it. And then you said, how do I behave in light of what I believe? And it just opened up like beautiful light has shined on my whole life. Like I am doing what I want to do. I do have this wonderful God. I like my relationship with God. Because I get mixed up with the Catholic stuff. I go ahead. I'm not putting the Catholic down. I like the Catholic, but I need my own relationship.
You do.
And
yeah.
That's what the set-aside prayer opened up. And I said, I do have a relationship with God. I like my God. Yeah. And my behavior reflects that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks for encouraging me to do that.
As you're welcome. It's the key to step 2, which we'll be coming to in another couple of weeks. I came to that assignment in my 3rd journey through the steps. The man gave me 2 things. Number 1, he gave me the set-aside attitude and prayer. And number 2, he asked me those 2 questions. And what I realized, like you're realizing, at the end of that kind of reflection and process, that I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years.
Right.
My concept of God from my tradition was the very impediment to my relationship with the mystery.
So you're saying it was very similar?
No, I'm saying it got in the way.
Oh, it got in the way. Okay, I misunderstood you.
Yeah, no, I was holding on to some stuff that was academic and theological, but not experiential, not practical.
Gotcha.
It's not your experience. You like the God that you have. I love the Catholic theology and the history and all the ritual and the liturgy and the philosophy behind it. I love all of that. I just wasn't living it.
I'm not that great at it.
Well, it's not about being great. It's about just like, I actually didn't believe it as witnessed by my feet.
Right. That's what I saw. The witness by what I'm doing.
It's very objective and it's very in your face.
Well, you said, well, see what your feet are doing. What are your feet? Where are your feet taking you?
That's it.
That's there. It is right there.
That's right.
That doesn't lie to you.
Never.
Right.
Yep. Good. I'm so glad that it's been a good experience for you.
I'm learning. Alcoholics learn by repetition. I really need.
Well, and yes.
And I'm glad you're going slow.
Well, not only that, it's the style of the book. When Bill enters into a new phase, he always stands on the path that he's traveled and looks back over his shoulder and gives us a bit of a recap. And I think, yes, it's exactly what we humans need. That's why I give a context at the beginning of every workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's working. It's working for me.
It sounds like it's working wonderfully for you. So stay with it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so this unmanageability piece was very eye-opening.
In what way?
So I really like this, before we get to the bedevilment, where on page 61, where it says being kind, considerate, patient, generous, modest, all of that. That kind of struck a chord with me because I feel like the root of my unmanageability is my expectation from being all of those things, right? When I don't receive what I expect in return, I feel like my life becomes unmanageable. My emotions just kind of take over.
Yes. Yep.
And it's really good to see that away from my addiction, because, you know, it could be food, it can be codependency, it can be alcohol, it can be gambling, it could be anything. I mean, it depends on the day of the week for me sometimes.
Or the hour of the day.
Right, exactly. But the root is really that I have a lot of expectations when I do something for someone or something or whatever. So it really, you know, it's just, I really am that selfish, and I could never see that. I always just thought like, well, but I'm doing so much for everyone else and not myself. So anyway, thank you.
Well, that's the key that many of the Al-Anons and the adult children of alcoholics or the codependents have a hard time with, for the very reasons that you just talked about. What do you mean? I just spend my entire day trying to help people. I'm thinking about others all the time. But what you just said was, yeah, underneath that, the motive is corrupt.
Right. And
Yeah.
you realize that, for me, I realized it as my life continued to feel unmanageable. It's like, well, why does it feel unmanageable? I'm doing good things all day. I'm doing good things. Why do I feel like crap? Oh, because I expect something out of it. So, yeah.
And you get tired, by the way.
Right. Oh, yeah. Very tired. What I am worried about is, how do you convert the information to the transformation, right? And I think it's in the practice, you said.
Yeah.
I just worry that my ego gets in the way sometimes and says, you're good.
It's a legitimate concern. Yes.
It's how do I suppress it? How do I keep it?
How about this? You can't.
Right. God.
No, this is the point.
Right.
This is the point.
Right.
This is the implosion that I pray you all have. I need to, but I can't. Therefore, with a desperation, I better connect to a power that's going to carry me down the field and across the goal line.
Right.
Now, I don't mean to connote passive there, because we're going to enter into steps 4 through 9, which is very active. So you will be doing a lot of training and a lot of work and a lot of muscle exercise 4 through 9.
Right.
All right. But to answer your question now very directly, you said, so how do I deal with my ego? Certainly not with my ego. Correct. You deal with it going through. What are the manifestations of the ego, steps 4 through 9? And you connect to power. And as the step 5 promises on page 75 say, we walk hand in hand
Oh,
with the
okay.
Spirit. See, it's a co-creation and a collaboration. Those are my favorite words. They don't come from the big book, but the images do.
Right.
Yeah? Well, let me just read the page 75, the promise that just trips my trigger every time. We feel we are on the broad highway, capital B, capital H, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. That's the image.
Wow.
I know, wow. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with other people, it's about patience. It's about breathing. It's about showing up and doing the next indicated thing. Yeah. By Sunday, you're not going to have this experience. But 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, I don't know when it will happen. I do know that it will happen. And you're going to be sitting there with tears in your eyes talking to me about, oh my God, Herb, what you said was true. And I'm going, yep.
Can't wait.
Yeah, you can actually. And you have to.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thanks very much.
There's something about owning the selfishness and the self-centeredness of my disease and the underlying, the permission to go, yeah, I really had secret motives through all of that too.
Mm-hmm.
And being a victim was so much more delicious in a lot of ways until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't, because it doesn't work when you become, a little bit more conscious.
Right. And so there's this tenderness for me. I mean, I did the homework the way it was put in I-form, and I mean, wow, and a lot of the bedevilments didn't apply to me, which made me feel even more grateful because every single one of them did apply.
Mm. Oh, you mean, so you see the contrast.
Very much so.
And you're grateful and humbled by the contrast.
I can't even articulate it, but there seems to be something very grounding about when I go to prayer meditation in the morning, knowing the root of what I wake up with every morning.
Yeah.
Like a diabetic has to take their insulin, right? And
that's a very good metaphor. Could you expand on that a little bit? It's really a good one.
I feel like for me, it used to be like, for instance, I mean, I've been sober 30 years, which is fine. I mean, that's like, thank you, God. But what I mean is, like, I used to think prayer meditation was something I could do if I was in the mood. If I was having a bad day, it was kind of like using how I use drugs and alcohol, right? Or get me out of a scrape, right?
Yeah.
And it's like prayer and meditation is my insulin. I don't have another remedy at this point.
Right.
And I didn't know that till now.
Yeah.
So it is with my cup of coffee in hand.
Yes. Yes.
That I go to my prayer place and I'm learning how to pray and learning how to meditate with no expectations.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And just to tease it out just a little bit more, because it's a very powerful image. I have not used it before, but as soon as you said it, I related to it. And that was, if you're a diabetic, you have a insulin imbalance, which at the best will just allow you to be tired. At the worst, you'll go blind and you'll begin losing limbs and eventually die. Mm-hmm. So a real diabetic has to do measurements on a daily basis and take their insulin either by pill or by injection on a daily basis. So it's a matter of life and death. Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly the picture that you were painting about prayer and meditation. Mm-hmm. It's not a nice thing for spiritual people to do.
No, and I thought it was. I'm not going to lie. I used to think, well, I'm so spiritual.
Yeah. I mean, I just get such a chuckle out of people say, Monday through Friday, I'm really good because I have a work structure. But on the weekends, I miss my prayer and meditation. I said, oh, yeah, because on the weekends, you don't need God.
Right. No, and that would have totally been my, I would have said the same thing, like, oh no, I'm going to a yoga retreat. So there, you know, I'll be doubly spiritual for Monday. So we need to do it Monday.
There you go.
Anyways, yeah. And then just the check-in with the, like staying on the insulin metaphors, like the 10th step keeps me in check. You know, you just, I can't articulate it yet because I'm.
Well, it's like the diabetic measure. I know there's kind of like tests or meters, and now I can see on the advertisements there's like patches that people wear or things that they wear that signal to them as a meter as to their level of insulin. So that and that's like the 10th step.
Yes.
The 10th step is a thermometer.
Yes. And I really still bugs the crud out of me that when I'm disturbed, it's my fault. I'm like, that is my first response. But then, of course, but I love that that's my first response because it's like, I still, okay, good.
Right, yeah.
Anyways.
What I'm getting from a lot of this about the unmanageability is that my best self shows up. I was writing as a mother, as a nurse with my patients, with my fellows in, AA and FA, with my friends. And my worst self shows up with my partner. And now this is the third man in my life, 2 husbands, and now my partner, who has told me that I speak differently when I'm speaking to my fellows or my friends than I do at home, or that they're not following the right script. And I have made amends before. I have made amends about expectations and not having them and how they can only fall short. And I feel hopeless right now. I feel like that is me, that trouble with my personal relationships, can't control my emotional nature, prey to misery and depression, and full of fear. But if you asked anyone at work, they would never see that. That's never how they would describe me. But at home,
oh, because you're a great actor.
Oh my God. And I'm aware of it too.
Morals and philosophy do not help us.
No.
Information and sobriety doesn't help us.
Well, I'm sticking with you because I'm on this train, and this awareness and these writings, I'm trusting this whole process.
Yeah. Well, you bought the ticket and you got on the train, and there's things to do, but the train's going to take you to the destination. That's a great image also.
Yeah, and I'm on it with all these other wonderful people and you. So
I'm on it and in it, and I'm going to have to do a little thing to stay with the train, get my ticket punched every once in a while. Train to take me to the destination. I can't get here from there. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Can't say that I feel great about it right now, but in a way, it's great.
Anybody who feels great in the first step isn't doing it correct.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing about the 4th step. Anybody who feels good doing the 4th step is not doing it correctly. This is soul surgery. I'm not kidding.
No, because this will was developed, it's very strongly for survival, right? At some point in my life. It has not let me down. It has
gotten me. It has.
No, but I mean, like, it's gotten me through, you know what I mean? Through
I made that program.
It got me to AA.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful tool.
But on the other hand, it was great because it put me through nursing school. It helped me raise a kid. Like that part of it is great. And then the rest is run riot.
And the promise of the steps is contentment, joy, and happiness and freedom on a constant, consistent basis.
Not fleeting. It doesn't come up every now and then. It's just
It
baseline.
doesn't mean that we don't have speed bumps, but we have the shock absorbers to handle the speed bumps. And our life essentially is very smooth. Yeah.
That's a beautiful image.
Well, Thank you. And it helps me communicate to you what my experience is also, so that y'all can sort of capture it with these pictures that we painted. That's why I grasped onto something like the insulin.
Yeah. And as a nurse, I get that because
Oh,
it's not a moral judgment. I just take your numbers. I just check your blood. Oh, if the number's this, we'll give you this much. There's no like right, wrong information. It's just like, let's just do it.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The last time I talked to you, you said to me, well, how's it working for you? And I said, well, 80% of the time good. But what I omitted was I've had terrible relationship with my husband for years.
Oh, there you go.
And, I just never, ever saw my part in it.
Yeah.
And I'm in the program. I'm in OA 40 years. And then I went to AA. And then I did Al-Anon. And each gave me a little bit, but I still kept feeling like I was locked in a room. Like you said, you don't know until you know. And that's really been my experience. I could not find the door or how to open the window. I knew all the answers, and I felt like I always got to a certain spot, and I was locked in the corner.
Yeah.
So how you explain things has really, really helped me. And one of the things that I try to do has been, I hooked on to what's my experience, because I've been so good at accomplishing and doing and running my life that, whatever I did and was fairly successful at it, and still ended up unhappy. This angst.
Yeah.
So,
See, but that's, again, thank you for being courageous and vulnerable and sharing that with us, because many people are relating to you right now. And what you're saying is, despite, I think you said 40 years of being in the different fellowships of 12-step and doing lots of work and having lots of success because of your efforts and your fellowship and your sponsorship and whatever else, underneath there's a piece in your life that's very unfulfilling.
yes.
Yeah.
And
And now you're been given the gift to admit it to yourself, and maybe it becomes a priority to take a look at. I don't know what the outcome will be or what even the problem is, and you may or may not know what the problem is, and you absolutely cannot predict the outcome.
right.
I started this step work in 1988 because I was losing a job that I'd had for 20 years. And I wanted to keep that job because I loved the company and I loved the job I had. At the end of the work, which I did in order to change, in order to keep the job, I resigned. And I went on to another company, which I retired from after 20 years, very successfully. But here's another story. 3 years later, I'm married to this woman for 25 years and I want a divorce. So I'm going to do the steps in order to leave her on a spiritual basis, the white knight that I am. So I did the steps, and at the end of the steps, I found out that I was the problem. And before she died, we had 52 years of marriage together, and the last 35 were phenomenal, just wonderful friendship. All right. So the point, though, just in case anybody missed the point, because it wasn't maybe that clear, I started the steps in order to keep a job and I lost it. I did the steps again in order to lose my wife and I kept her. You don't know what the outcome will be. See what I mean? Now, 3 years later, I did the steps because there was no turmoil in my life. I just knew that there was more. And I had a powerful experience. It took me 2 years to do the steps. And and what happened is what I was discussing earlier, in that my whole spiritual life opened up. Now that I had dealt with the white sharks in my life, my job and my marriage, I was able to focus on expanding my spiritual life, and you just never know where this journey is going to take you. That was my point of that. A long story for a very short answer.
Well, what you just said was the 12 steps aren't going to do it. Nothing will do it except your dependence and finding God. And that really has been, I was aware that every time because I'm a chronic relapser, I was aware that eventually it was the problem that I didn't pray enough.
No,
But it's more than just the praying.
No.
I'm doing the work, but
Yeah.
not praying for the experience.
Yeah.
And brought that out.
I'm so glad that you're helping us recap what I said, because maybe I didn't bring it to the conclusion that you're bringing it to so clearly, and that is, there's only one solution: a relationship with power. And Bill said it clearly, although we don't really appreciate it, on page 45. Lack of power is my dilemma. I have to find a power by which I can live. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. Lack of power.
Yeah, I was listening to everybody talk and thinking about unmanageability. I just have to say it's very humbling, and it's I experienced this profound sadness almost. It's really difficult for me to I think, when I have to face the fact that I really don't have any power, because then I feel like I don't know where to turn. I know we're talking about spirituality, and so that tells me then I have to work on or pray for or lean into or find that power. It takes me back to a time in my life when I thought I had an understanding of spirituality and did a lot of praying, and nothing happened that I was aware of. And I'm afraid that's going to happen again, or sometimes it feels like it's happening. I know there's hope. I believe this is working because I'm really thinking about things.
I really appreciate your expression of emotion and vulnerability. You're not just thinking about it, you're having an experience with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And so, I'm very selfish and self-centered. I didn't have any problem admitting that when it said that. I said, oh yeah, that's me all over the place. It doesn't work. And then the question is, the question is, for me, I guess on a more positive, or not a positive note, a different note, where I recognize that this past week, I was definitely upset with the situation. I'm on a condo board, and I was upset with the situation, and people were yelling and screaming, and I just wanted to fix them all. I just wanted to fix the situation, not because I was so concerned. I was more concerned about not having flashbacks of and feeling those feelings that I had when my parents would argue.
Yeah.
So it took me back I'm 62. It took me back over 40 years.
Yeah.
And, I'm pulling emotions from 40 years ago and recognizing that today I can sit in that discomfort. I don't have to try to fix, because I can't fix other people or situations. All I have to do is show up, speak my truth kindly and lovingly, and then be quiet.
Yeah.
And just be quiet. It's not easy, but when I did that, it didn't trigger other things that pushed me into my addiction. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
It didn't trigger me. I had relief.
Yeah.
So I have a real example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The key to serenity is the pause. The ability to take a breath just for a moment without speaking and reacting. And if we can be a little bit conscious during that time, the longer the reaction, the better, the longer the pause, the better the reaction, the more healthy it will be. And many times, no reaction is the healthiest. Silence is the healthiest. Very few people really are interested in your opinion.
Yeah. I'm always interested in my opinion. That's about it. Because I'm not interested in other people's opinions most of the time.
Well, Al-Anon has, I think, a great formula. I'm not in Al-Anon, but I've heard the Al-Anon speak, and I might not get it right, but I get a lot of it. Is before you speak, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the truth? Is it the right time to say it? Am I the one to say it? And I know there's more, but those kind of pause questions will bring peace to you and the rest of the people in your life.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, when I wake up in the morning, I pray and I have good intentions to do good things and good deeds. But it's like my ego and gets in the way, and self-centeredness, and it just doesn't work out that way. I have to if I get in my head before I try to get God in my head, I'm really a mess.
Yeah.
So I've got to try to get up and get God in there first, and that's by praying first thing. But you know, it's another thing too that I've been thinking. You know, there's so many folks that have so many years, and they're now just discovering things. You know, it's just, for somebody who has just over a year, that seems like, can that happen? I mean, you know, I want to know how many years it's going to take. You know, I just know that
it's going to take the rest of your life to live your life. But we don't know how many years or months it's going to take to become more awake.
Yes.
Yeah. But it has to be kind of comforting to the newer people, meaning anybody with less than 10 years, to hear people with 20 and 30 years talk about, wow, I'm just getting this now.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. And you just said the newer people under 10 years.
I did. Yeah.
I don't think the newer people are under a year. That's the way I look at it.
Well, I don't very often talk about newcomers, that kind of thing. But quite frankly, I was a newcomer for 5 years. I didn't know that, and I would have challenged you had you ever brought it to my attention within that 5-year period.
Yes.
But when I look back over the lack of awareness that I had, I was a newcomer for 5 years.
Wow, yeah.
It took that long for me to thaw out. Yeah.
I'll just keep plugging away.
Well, what's the alternative?
Right.
You know,
yeah.
Show up, lean in, breathe, and begin to really enjoy this process of discovery. Even when it creates suffering, it's really a signal that you're into solution. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Herb.
You bet.
And this just totally intrigues me. I need an HP to be human. So could you be more specific?
Well, I don't remember saying the HP part, but certainly I would have said something like that. And that is, I think the human condition is such that we have this, and I'm going to use a very large word, existential yearning. At the very deepest level of the core of our very being, that's what I mean by existential. It's something that's built into us, like the threads of a shirt, the color built into it. That there's this gnawing feeling that something's missing. Most people pursue material satisfaction in order to try to satisfy that itch they can't scratch, that thirst they can't slake, that hunger that they can't fill. Carl Jung wrote a letter to Bill Wilson. In response to Bill Wilson's letter, I won't go into the entire history of it, although it is interesting. Carl Jung said that most of the mystics, meaning the highly developed spiritual people over the centuries, have expressed this experience as an absence of spirit. And they yearn for that as completing their being, completing their reality, completing their sense of wholeness. And that's the context in which I mean it. Carl Jung said essentially what I said about hunger and thirst, that the spirit is the only thing that satisfies this underlying need for human beings. And he said, alcoholics are unusually spiritual people. Addicts, I could mention, then broadening it for our audience, are unusually spiritual people. They long for this connection and this union and this unity. Not knowing exactly what it is, most people are not exposed to the information, the history, the knowledge, the philosophy, the theology of what I'm talking about. And they try to fill this human angst with material things. And he said there's only one solution, and that's a relationship with the spirit. And then he said a Latin word, spiritus contra spiritum. The spirit with a capital S is the antidote, contra, is the antidote to spirits. Alcohol, spirits with a small s. And so I'm not sure that is a satisfactory answer. That's a good beginning of a conversation from my standpoint, but it gives sort of the context of it.
Thank you.
Well, there's a question that's asked, and you've heard it asked and maybe discussed in meetings or in literature. Are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience, or are we spiritual beings seeking a human experience? And after several weeks actually of meditation on that, I was very convinced that the answer is yes. See, two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
It's on the side of the coin you're looking at. One side says heads, one side says tail, but it's still the same coin. Am I human or am I spiritual? Well, by spiritual, I mean relationship. And in that context of definition, as a human being, I'm needing a relationship, certainly with myself. It apparently, history tells us that as a human being, I need a relationship with other human beings in community. We're social animals. But there's something bigger than that. All the study of happiness by positive psychology and the scientists that are pursuing, trying to codify what makes us happy, have said The only thing that will make a human being happy is a relationship of contribution in a world of meaning broader than themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. That anybody who wants to be happy, that's their goal, will never be happy. Because happiness is a byproduct, not a product.
Mm-hmm.
The byproduct of my relationship with meaning broader than myself and contribution to the world around me. And from my standpoint, that makes eminent sense when I look at steps 11 and 12, what I call the spiritual coin. Our relationship with God on one side of the coin, our relationship with people on the other side of the coin. And Bill said, and I'll conclude with this. He said someplace in the book, I'm not sure, I think it's maybe page 125, we need to keep our head in the clouds and our feet on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
That's perfect. Our head in the clouds, our feet on the ground, meditate in the morning to get guidance, and then spend the rest of our day certainly taking care of ourselves, but also how can I contribute to the world around me? That's a big question that you asked, and I've given kind of a small answer, but the beginnings of a wonderful conversation. Does it help?
Yes, it does. My whole chest area just relaxed incredibly. So thank you.
Nice. Yeah, that you heard it. Yeah. And now I will just conclude with a phrase from Pascal, who captures what I just said in 5 minutes. He captured it in 5 words. The whole in us is in the shape of God.
Sure, I've heard that.
Yeah, whole in us cannot be filled with power and money and prestige or activity. But we don't know that until we suffer from trying to fill it with all of those things. That's what addiction is all about, and that's what recovery is all about. Material things never fill the hole.
My definition I wrote down for willfulness is resistance to discipline, stubborn, intentional, prone to disobedience, lack of discipline. And say, for instance, last Wednesday, I texted the leader and said, I'm running late, I'm not going to make it today. And it was a lie. It was because I hadn't done my homework. And it was just like a 5th grader skipping school. You know, I called my sponsor, I discussed it with him, and he said, Jack, they're not going to do anything to you. Get on the meeting, you know. So I got on the meeting. I got honest about it. I said, you know, I just need to fess up. I lied, said I wasn't coming. I hadn't done my homework. I feel that I'm not good enough. You know, I got the baseball bat out and was wailing away. And they all just said, we love you and thanks for being honest. Quit beating yourself up and like that. But I guess where I'm going with it, I don't know if it's ADD. I don't know if it's procrastination. I don't know if it's the second half of step 1, my unmanageability. I graduated high school with a D-. I'm a smart guy. I could have been a surgeon. I'm coordinated. I'm intelligent. I did the least amount. I knew what I needed to do to pass, and that's what I did. I was just a piece of work. And I was smoking dope and drinking and carrying on like an idiot then, but that's just been my pattern to go into confusion, to have this roadblock, and then take myself down deep in the black hole and waller there. I mean, it becomes a delusion, a one-track mind in this dark hole. And I don't know, I just was going to run that by you and see if you had anybody or experience with somebody with that type of personality. Or
I would say 60 to 70% of the men that call me sponsor, you just described.
Well,
Now, maybe not as severe or just different in terms of the behavior and the outcome, but the underlying dynamic. Let me ask a couple questions.
okay.
You use the term procrastination. What does that mean for you?
That I'll put off a job, let's say on my honey-do list, I fix it around the house, and then another one will pop up, and then I've got two to fix, and then it could be my clutter in the garage, not cleaning up my garage, my closet. You can hardly hang another T-shirt because of my food addiction, my size. I've got some medium, some large, some X large. Just don't want to get rid of anything because I might need it. You know, I'm a hoarder. All this, but instead, all this stuff is like the dishwasher getting full and running over, and that's an underlying issue that's eating my lunch too, I'm sure.
Okay.
Bothering me.
Okay, so that really does answer my question, and it prevents me from asking other questions that I thought might be relevant that are not. Let me pursue a different path with you. Have you ever had a discussion with a professional about this?
No, I used to do group therapy.
No, I don't mean that.
But it was.
No. Yeah, because a group therapy probably wouldn't get underneath this, especially if you did it 20 years ago, because people were not that knowledgeable. My sense is that you probably have, given the words that you used, you probably have some form of brain dysfunction in the sense of ADD or ADHD. And that would explain your attitude in school. It would explain the clutter. It would explain what you call procrastination, I call distraction. Because procrastination really is fear. When you get to the root of the procrastination, usually it's a symptom of some form of perfectionism where people don't want to get started for fear of failure, so they actually don't start and they put it off, or fear of criticism. I don't hear that in you. I heard distraction. And so that it's a systemic problem. It is absolutely not a problem that you can address effectively with knowledge or even or a spiritual solution. It really does take either medication or professional sort of fine-tuning, some type of behavioral. Tell me your response to what I'm talking about.
I'm just 63 years of it's long enough. My response is I'd heard you share before in choosing a professional to try to find an addictionologist. Is that correct?
Yeah, that might be the case, but I don't think that's the kind of professional that you want here. I think you want a clinical psychologist that has a specialty in evaluation. Okay. So that you can determine whether or not on the surface of it, I'm not a professional, I just have some information, to determine the diagnosis before you begin any sense of pursuing a treatment. You need to find out what the original problem is. And my suggestion would be some type of a clinical psychologist that has a specialty in evaluating and testing, or somebody that has some orientation and training in ADD. There's a series of books by an author. I've not read the books, but the title has always intrigued me, and it's Driven to Distraction. I believe it's Dr. Amen, A-M-E-N, Driven to Distraction. And that might be at least some initial exposure to their thoughts on it and their symptoms. And if it felt like it was relevant, then you might want to pursue that. in your local community.
Okay.
When you're aware of something amiss, that's half of the battle, isn't it? Because now then you begin asking questions of people about people who have information and or are trained. And so you're on the road. It's not a simple problem to evaluate nor to find experienced and effective people to help you, but be patient with it and use your common sense. All right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right.
One of the main reasons I joined this workshop is I feel that after all the time that I have spent in Al-Anon, and like, you've said, I've got all this flippin' knowledge, and yet I'm still reacting instead of responding.
And that's a pivotal distinction. I'm reacting rather than responding. Mature people pause, evaluate, and then respond or not. Immature people just react. The outcome of a reaction is hardly ever healthy.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what you're experiencing.
That's what I'm experiencing.
And so then we have to come to, well, with 36 years in Al-Anon and a really decent program by at least our superficial evaluation, and an understanding of the steps and an experience with the steps, why don't you just get a grip and change that?
Well, and you see, therein lies the problem, because that's what I'd like to do. Why don't I just change that? I can't tell you, I have pounded on the bed. God, would you take this away from me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is part, you scared me a couple of weeks ago when you said, well, some people can, continue to make their conscious contact, but that doesn't guarantee it happens. Although I have not been, I'm still, I'm doing much better here, but I'm still struggling with every single morning meditating. I'm doing it like 4 or 5 days a week now.
Wait. You're not struggling. You're not doing it.
No, I'm not doing it every day. That's right. I'm doing it now. I'm up to 4 to 5 days, but not every day.
You're not convinced.
Right.
You're not convinced that you need to. You're not convinced that meditation is the solution. You're not convinced that there is a God. You're not convinced that God cares. You're not convinced that God will be, in fact, an effective helper. There's so many things that you're not convinced of. And I don't know that because you've said it. I know that because your feet have shown that to me. When somebody tells me, especially with some long-term acquaintance with an immersion in a 12-step program, that they don't do it on a daily basis, that's not a judgment on my part. That's an objective evaluation. Well, that's because you don't believe you're powerless on a daily basis. So yeah, you started off the conversation perfectly. I'm not convinced. That is correct. Yep. So there's even a broader question here, because you said, until I began doing this work, I wasn't conscious that this was even a thorn in my shoe.
Right.
I knew that, I didn't even know that I was uncomfortable. But now I'm conscious that I've been uncomfortable for years. This isn't a new behavior on your part. This is a new awareness of old behavior.
Yeah. Yes.
And that should reinforce the whole idea that you're powerless, that you didn't have a choice of knowing it. And now that you know it, you're coming to the group saying, and I don't like it, and I don't seem to be willing enough to change it or able enough to change it. When you look back over your shoulder of 36 years in a program, doing the best that you could, do you see that, in fact, you have had at least cycles of disturbances that you didn't know that you had, and problems with people and relationships that you didn't address in any conscious way? They suffered through it and you suffered through it.
I did try to address it through other means, though.
Sure.
You know what I mean, which again goes back to knowledge and education. I can't believe the growth I'm experiencing. I said it reminds me of like the first 7 years, you know, when I was in Al-Anon, and now it's happening to me again. And deep down inside, I'm very grateful because I believe in lifelong learning, and I believe that's why we're here, to keep learning. But geez, you know, it's like, man, have you been missing this?
Okay, so wonderful conversations, exploring really deeply this whole issue of unmanageability and what does it mean? What's the resonance of it? Once we get beyond the words and the surface of the bedevilments, which you notice we haven't talked about at all, we've gone down underneath that concerning the dynamics of it. And you went right to it, self-will and self-reliance, and yet you were using the terms in a way certainly that are connoted in the book, meaning unhealthy, but I believe now as a result of this dialogue that you're seeing the tentacles of the unhealthiness much deeper than perhaps you did before.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this has been helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so don't rush to judgment. Don't rush to conclusion. Don't rush to an agreement. Be led to it. All right?
Yeah.
Just lean gently into it, and just be aware of what's happening when it's happening or after it has happened. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the dialogue. It was probably helpful to you, but I'm confident helpful to many, many people. Thank you.
And I love being a listener where I can just listen and not do the guilt thing about whether I got my homework done. I have progressed so much on the guilt and the fear and all of that kind of stuff. But you said to this beautiful woman that was speaking, you said, how much abstinence do you have from codependency? And I thought, what? You can measure that? So I loved when you said something like, my will was broken, or I don't even know. But then you said, align my will with God. And I've been doing that. The whole meditation part is getting better and better for me. The self-will, that there's a thing that goes around the AFA meetings a lot, and it's, if you had a date with God, would you stand him up? And the answer is yes. Not only would I, but I've done it on a regular basis. But back to the subject that I'd like you to talk a little bit about is, how do I measure my codependency?
So the question is about the measurement and containment of codependency?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Interesting question. I actually don't know that much about codependency. I've read Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More, 2.5 times. I'm in the midst of reading it for the 3rd time. And it's an area that I know intuitively will expand my understanding of the dynamic of addiction and addicts underneath, because I think it's the underbelly of an awful lot of human misery. But I also understand that there's like in food addiction, there's a variety of the manifestations of food addiction. You know, in alcohol, that's just not true. The alcoholic has 1 or 2 responses. You either chronically lose control, that means every time you use it, or you periodically lose control. Those are the only 2 variations of an alcoholic. For a food addict, you can undereat, that's an anorexic, You can overeat, that's a bulimic. And or you can be addicted in the sense of the management of food without any type of a body weight dysfunctionality. So it really is very tricky, as I understand it. I think the same is true with codependency. So the most grossest understanding from my standpoint, meaning the broadest, not negative, the broadest understanding of codependency is that I get my sense of value for how you perceive me.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that's the broadest level, that I operate to please you because if you're pleased with me, I'm okay. You've named me as valuable, therefore I must be valuable. Or another variation on that is, I'm not stupid, I'm not smart enough or strong enough to make a decision about my life, but I can depend on you because you're smart enough and strong enough to make those decisions for me, and I will depend on that. It's kind of a variation on a theme. The image I have that really captures that strongly is a puppet on string. People and circumstances and events up till age 48 for me were all the puppet masters. I had attached strings to them for various reasons, and they were the ones that were determining my thoughts and my feelings and my behavior. I wasn't. I was reacting, I didn't realize, to their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions, their expectations, because I didn't have it deep down inside of myself. If you were on the call, on the workshop with Dr. Alan Berger and myself and Tommy Rosen, you might have heard Dr. Berger say, emotional sobriety is having the center of gravity deep down inside of myself. My center of gravity is deep down within me, not in events, not in circumstances, and not in people. It's an organic development within me. So the center of me is in me, not outside of me. So how do you recognize whether it's contained or not? Is whether you are living your life the way you want to live it, and it's not contained to the extent that you're living your life from outside influences. And he said in one of our workshops, we're very spontaneous together. That's what makes it very magical. We were in an all-day workshop, had been in a variety of workshops for 10 years, so we were really used to one another interaction. But typically he and I, because we're so spontaneous, say new things at each workshop, just because we're always growing. And so I learned to expect that. And he said in this particular workshop, Herb, he looked at me, he was addressing me in front of 200 people. And he said, Herb, do you know there's only one reason to do anything? And I had never heard him ask the question nor have any comment on it before. So I was a little stuck, but I trust him. And I looked at him and I said, no, I don't know what the answer to that is. He said, Herb, there's only one reason to do anything, and that's because you really want to. Now, you might do something as a secondary preference because your primary preference is in fact to have a good relationship with your partner. So you will compromise a little bit, knowing that you're intentionally compromising yourself to not do exactly what you wanted, but what you really want more than what you wanted is a relationship with your partner. That was a little complicated. Did you follow that?
I did.
Yeah.
I have trouble being able to help other people. What is that? That's one of the bedevilments is I'm not able to help other people. And it just hit me. Oh my gosh. I've done it again. I have helped other people to the point that she's right. I shouldn't sponsor anybody right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding I can hear better and I'm growing better and my meditations are better. you know, it was very helpful.
Yeah, that's an experienced and wise sponsor that values you more than your appreciation of her. She took a risk with that. And that's really good. I'm reminded of two things. Number one, the flight attendant who says, put your own mask on first, oxygen,
Right.
because you can't help anybody if you're unconscious. All right, put your own mask on first. That's the priority. Take care of yourself. But that's tradition one and tradition two. Notice the balance. And that's what I saw in Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More. And she said, maturity is the balance between independence and interdependence. And she calls it undependent. In other words, a bridge is built on a pilaster on one side of the river and a pilaster on other side of the river. All right? Those are independent, but the bridge is interdependent. The islands themselves are independent, but there is a conscious commitment, intent to have a relationship. I'm talking about humans now. All right. So I'm really independent. My wife became really independent, but we agreed to have a relationship. And then we talked about, so what are the agreements with regard to that relationship that allowed us to maintain our independence as well as our interdependence. Melody Beattie calls that undependent. There's no dependency at all. I love the term. It's a brand new term, and I just picked it up the last time I read her book. I mean, the current time I'm reading the book for the third time.
That was very helpful, Herb. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And continue pursuing that, I will, in the area of the codependency, because I think there's so much, it's a huge world. And I think there's so much there for us to understand, not only for our own balance. Balance is the key to emotional sobriety, that balance, where I have the ability to take care of myself. At the same time, I'm effectively helping other people. But it's very easy to get lost for lots of reasons in terms of helping other people. It just becomes another narcotic. As you said, I got lost in the helping of other people, and I lost my consciousness of taking care of myself. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I did that really well.
Well, a lot of people do with good intention, because this unmanageability we're not cured of. So if in fact we don't have balance in our life, meaning the morning meditation, we will go to sleep. Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher, said, all human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. It's a huge, wonderful, wise statement. And our job is to, number one, wake up and stay awake, and then bring some light to other people to help them wake up and stay awake. But the human condition, Harry Tiebout, a psychiatrist that was helping Bill Wilson, said human beings can wake up. The ego will be deflated with steps 1 through 9. Bill got it absolutely right. Step 1 through 9 will deflate the ego, but the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. And that's the not cured, and that's the unmanageability, and that's the spiritual malady from which we have a daily reprieve. That was pretty intense.
It's the awareness that I thought I had that I didn't have, and that's that.
That's it right there.
God is there if I invite him. And how often have I gone into really challenging situations, and it was like I was doing it so that later I could tell him and he'd give me an A+. No concept of the fact.
Codependency.
Yes, it is.
Getting your reward, your validation outside of yourself.
Yeah.
Now, we're trained by that. Just look at any adult looking at a baby, and when the baby smiles, what the adult does, reinforce the smile. The adult is training the baby how to behave. And we were all babies, trained how to behave. Right. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you. That's all the time we have. So we're finishing up assignment 5. Next week, I would like to spend time with each of the people who haven't shared that are in the active group, having them share about their experience with the unmanageability, especially the will worksheet, and any experience that you might have or reflection that you might have in doing that final assignment of turning the statement into a question. Am I convinced? And next week, I'll give you the assignment on step 2. So please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.